Welcome to GothCast, episode 21. I am Dr. Sanders.
This is Robbie Gore.
And today we're going to be talking about 3 movies that star a very particular person.
Yeah, and in light of recent news, we thought that it was time to pay tribute to this particular person. And that man is, Donnie?
David Bowie.
Yes, it is.
Today we're going to be taking a look at Labyrinth, The Hunger, and The Man Who Fell to Earth. Now, these are 3 very different movies for 3 very different audiences, actually, which is kind of weird.
It's kind of like David Bowie's music career.
Yeah, exactly, right? So not everybody will latch onto all of these movies, or, I mean, you might, just because David Bowie's in them.
I will say he looks exceptional in all of them.
Yes, he does. Well, we'll get to that. But this time we're going to go in reverse chronological order. So we're going to do The Labyrinth first. And one of the reasons I want to do that first is because I think everybody wants to hear our opinion on that one the most.
Yes, and probably that's going to be the film that everyone's the most familiar with, next to maybe The Hunger.
Absolutely. The Labyrinth is not only a cult classic, and, most goth people love that movie. It's usually one of their favorite movies, or it's the movie that's put on at parties. It's the movie that people dress up as characters from. It's a very, very well-known movie to a lot of people who are into goth, just because of the aesthetic, honestly. And some of the music is pretty cheesy. I bet I like it.
Yeah.
We'll get to that. But then The Hunger...
Yeah. Well, yeah, never mind. We'll get to it.
Yeah. Yeah, but then The Hunger, it's a little bit darker, a little bit more adult. Actually, a lot more adult than Labyrinth.
I will say it's also very much more goth in its music and its appearance and its themes as well. Whereas The Labyrinth kind of has this very mystical quality to it, and the fact that David Bowie in it, I think, makes it appeal to gothic audiences. I feel The Hunger, though, is much more along the lines of a movie that even if it didn't have David Bowie in it, gothic people would gravitate towards.
Yeah, I just think it helps.
Oh, it definitely helps.
Yeah, and then after we do The Hunger, we're going to do probably the most obscure movie that we're talking about today, which is The Man Who Fell to Earth, which is David Bowie's first starring role in any movie, or at least a main motion picture.
Yeah.
And this was at a time when he was at a very rough patch in his life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very unique film. Definitely not as available as The Labyrinth, because you can find The Labyrinth everywhere, pretty much. If I want to go rebuy The Labyrinth, I could find it most chain stores, even like Target or Walmart.
Oh, definitely.
Whereas The Hunger is definitely more obscure than that, and I feel like The Man Who Fell to Earth is even more obscure than The Hunger.
Yeah, The Hunger, you might find in some stores. You can definitely find it online. The Man Who Fell to Earth, you're not going to find in any stores. You can find it online, though, so it's not so obscure that it's impossible to get your hands on.
Yeah. But starting off this episode, it's going to be the man, the movie, the legend. It's Labyrinth.
This is probably a staple for a lot of people's childhoods, especially mine. I remember seeing this for the first time when I was maybe 7, 8 years old.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly when I first saw The Labyrinth. I honestly cannot remember for the life of me. That's mostly because I don't remember much of being a kid anyway.
Yeah.
But I do remember that when I was a teenager and I rewatched it, because I had seen it a lot growing up. But then when I was a teenager, I think we had a VHS copy or something that I saw.
Yeah.
And when I watched it again, I was just blown away by everything in the film. I don't know. I didn't really catch on the fact that David Bowie was so famous, when I was younger, obviously.
I didn't even know who David Bowie was the very first time I saw it. To me,
I
it
would
was
say
just
most people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember my cousin when she was in high school. When she was in high school, there was the whole emo pop punk sort of thing coming out. American Idiot and all that was popular. And Hot Topic was the store. And keep in mind, she's not somebody who is alternative in any way. She's whatever is popular, that's what she is for that year. And she started spiking her hair and wearing punk rock clothes and everything, because that's what was playing on MTV and stuff, with Good Charlotte. And
she was the girl all the bad guys want.
Yeah, she was the girl all the bad guys want.
I'm sorry to everybody for that reference.
Yeah, it was if you know what that is, then. But she bought a poster of Labyrinth, and she's like, "Oh, I love this movie, The Labyrinth." And I was like, "It's just Labyrinth. It's not the."
Yep.
No, I didn't say that, but
That's something you would say, though.
It would be something I would say. But she had this poster up, and I was like, yeah, I love David Bowie. She's like, who's that? And I was like, it's the guy in the movie, The Goblin King.
The guy singing all the songs.
Yeah, and I was like, look at the poster. It has like his name on it, you know? And she's like, yeah, what else is he in? I was like, he's David Bowie. He's a musician. He's famous for being a musician. He's not famous for being an actor. And she just seemed so confused. So there are people who are even, fans of this movie and don't know who.
She was probably thrown by the fact that he wasn't like Jessica Simpson or something.
That's probably it.
Yeah.
So I always remember that because this movie, especially when like the whole Hot Topic thing took off, this is one of those things that gets kind of lumped in with that group of things, or a lot of people associate it with the popularity of that.
Oh, definitely. And to this day, I still think that's like a big seller for Hot Topic. If you ever go to their website, you're always going to see tons of Labyrinth stuff, Labyrinth t-shirts, Labyrinth posters, everything Labyrinth.
Yeah, it's not bad when you get products or something, but we'll talk about some of the continued history of this. But I just wanted to kind of show you experience I had of this film, especially when it started kind of regaining more of its popularity. And nowadays, it's almost like mainstream how popular this movie is. It's crazy.
I would say that it's almost moved from a cult classic to being a mainstream film. And that's why I talked about it being part of a lot of people's childhoods, because I think when I was growing up, it was kind of an odd movie to see as a kid, even though a lot of kids saw it. But now I think like most people see it growing up. Like it's definitely like a staple of something you show your kids.
Yeah, I think so. Well, just because it's lasted so long.
Yeah.
Unlike a lot of other ones that just fade away. I would even say like Dark Crystal, which is Jim Henson's film before this.
Yep.
It's not nearly as popular, not nearly as viewed today as it once was.
Yeah, I partially attribute that to the lack of David Bowie in Dark Crystal.
That's probably it.
Yeah.
David Bowie's package. So, yeah. So here we go. Let's talk about the casting. So David Bowie plays Jareth the Goblin King, and he has his magical balls that he like moves with his hand.
Uh-huh.
And then he also has these crystal ones. Sorry. I just couldn't resist. But yeah, so one of the things that people always talk about with this movie is David Bowie's outfit. So he has, his costume is like very...
It's over the top.
It's very 80s. He has big, like, blonde hair. Like
It's very 80s.
Yeah, he's got like tiny leather jacket that has like, I think it has like little bat things on it, and then he wears these
just like lace and frills like flowing out of every part of his coat, and then
yeah, but then of course David Bowie's package in this movie, in this kids movie, David Bowie's package, he wears like these really like tight spandex.
They're like PVC like kind of pants.
Not really PVC. They're more like sweats that are really tight.
I know, but they're like that type of like cut to them.
Yeah. But then David Bowie's package very much has an outline on it.
Yeah.
And there's all these really funny like Instagram photos and Facebook pages that are dedicated to David Bowie's package because of it. And they would show like the images from the Labyrinth.
It's a lot of things you don't notice as a child when you rewatch children's movies.
Well, it was funny because the moment I saw it as a teenager, I was like, is anybody else noticing like what's up with this? Like why is this package so like out there? But then, yeah, so David Bowie's the Goblin King, and there's Jennifer Connelly when she's very young.
Yeah, she's not the most pleasant character, I will say that.
Okay. Yeah, so basically the plot is that Sarah has to watch her little brother, and there's Toby. She's, of course, a very rebellious and angry teenager, and she plays it very tropey, like, you guys don't understand me, I don't have anything to do.
She has very tropey 80s parents who don't understand their misbehaving teenage girl who's just going through growing changes.
Yep. And so what Sarah does is when she's watching him, she basically says this phrase or this
yeah, she's been reading this book called Labyrinth. It basically entails a story of a goblin world and the Goblin King. They briefly show that in the beginning of the film. Yeah. And then when she storms off to her room after she gets into a fight with her parents, we see her kind of dressing up in goblin-y kind of fairy tale-y clothes, and she's got all this stuff in her room. There's a typical like labyrinth maze thing that's sitting
I'll
on
come
her
back
desk.
to all that, by the way.
Yeah. So there's tons of like foreshadowing of what's going to happen like 5 seconds into the movie. But yeah, she basically starts like saying this incantation that she doesn't know is an incantation, and the movie keeps cutting between her talking and the goblins listening because they're waiting for her to say a specific phrase so that they can take the baby away, which is what she wants them to do.
Yeah, exactly. And so as soon as she says it, then the goblins take the baby away, and they're really creepy and kind of gross looking, but kind of adorable in a weird way. And
They're much more adorable as an adult. I remember seeing them as a child and being almost frightened of the goblins.
Yeah, but then the Goblin King shows up and basically tells her that you can't have him back. If you want to try, you can go through my labyrinth maze and try to rescue him.
But it's like impossible to make it through the labyrinth. No one's done it.
Yeah, so she only has a few hours. Turn back, Sarah. Turn back.
Yeah, he like sets a clock for her to like, it's the amount of time she has to finish the maze.
Yeah, it goes from there basically. She basically meets a few people throughout the movie, actually a whole bunch of different interesting creatures actually. And like I said, a lot of this stuff is actually, I mean, as far as the characters go, they are pretty tropey in terms of like their personalities.
They are, but I will say that a lot of them have enough depth to them and enough warmth as characters that I think people gravitate to them and want to like grab onto them. They're characters that are easy for kids, I think, to associate with. And it is technically a children's film, so like I won't harshly criticize it for being tropey.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that actually the way this film is presented, actually, it can definitely translate to adults. Because
definitely.
It definitely has that, like, I don't know, slight edge to it and it's just so bizarre, I think, that as an adult you're still kind of like, man, there's not really a movie like this.
Yeah, you also won't notice any foreshadowing things as a child, so you have that to look forward to.
Yeah, that's true. But as she goes through this labyrinth and is trying all these obstacles, she meets this little dwarf character named Hoggle.
Yep.
And
even though by the way, she calls him Hogwart. I think that's
really?
That's predestination right there.
Oh my gosh. I didn't know that. I didn't catch that this time.
Yeah, she accidentally calls him Hogwart. He's like, it's Hoggle. So that's where Harry Potter came from, everybody.
From the labyrinth?
Yep.
From a line Jennifer Connelly said to Hoggle?
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, he's the dwarf, and he's very reluctant to help her, but then, of course, comes around.
Yeah, he's persuaded by a plastic bracelet.
Yeah, and then there's Ludo, who I like. It's kind of like a Bigfoot character.
Yeah, Ludo's pretty cool. I think Ludo's one of my favorites. He's like this big, sad, giant, glumpy, like, I don't know, he reminds me of like a big apey Eeyore.
Yeah, but then you have Sir Didymus. He's a little fox. And I actually like him.
Yep.
Definitely, like, totally reminds me of, like, something that would be in, like, Monty Python.
Yeah. And pretty much all the characters in the film serve a purpose. Basically, they're all, like, teaching her a lesson. And this theme keeps popping up that you shouldn't take things for granted, that things aren't always what they seem, and that you should pay more attention to what's going on around you. And the movie seems to be screaming at Jennifer Connelly that she is an ungrateful child who is unaware of the world around her.
Yeah, that seems to really be one of the kickers, is that whining doesn't get you anywhere. It's a really falters on actually getting the point across, I think.
I will say that's one thing that I do kind of pick with this movie a little bit, is that, like, I get what they're trying to do, because although it is, an odd children's film, it is a children's film, and a lot of them are geared towards pushing like a specific moral on an audience, because the idea is that parents show them to their children to teach them something about society. But I feel like it's really overplayed in this movie.
Yeah, gosh, until pretty far in the film, she's just like, what do I do? Oh, this is useless. This is hopeless. She's just like,
everybody's like, no one will help me, and why is my life so horrible?
Then all of a sudden, she's like, oh, we can all do it together.
Yep.
It's like, okay, like, I don't know. Some movies, whenever they have a specific message like that, or like basically what's called like what's like a circle plot or a Q plot,
Yeah.
where the person at the end of the movie is in the same place that they were physically.
Yep.
But then, their whole personality's changed, so she's supposed to be stronger and not as stubborn and, more appreciative. But, like, feels a little not developed correctly. It's just hard. It's hard to explain unless you've kind of seen it. But just notice that, like, partway through the film, she's just all of a sudden, like, everyone's my friend and, like, we can do this, Like,
Yeah.
Whereas before, she just kept complaining.
Yeah, she pretty much complained about every single thing in the movie. And even like characters who were nice to her in the movie early on, they'll help her out and she's like, okay, bye. And they're like, wait. But
Yep.
she just runs away.
Yeah, but enough of that, breaking down the children's plot. One of the things you can't talk about the Labyrinth without discussing is the presentation of this film. Now,
Yeah.
I gotta say, it's on its own very strange, very cool level. It uses puppets, basically a ton of puppets. And all the puppets are done by, because this is directed by Jim Henson, so Sesame Street and Dark Crystal.
It's kind of like Dark Muppets in a way.
Yeah, it really is, like little goblins and everything. Like, it's just really, really well done. Like, it's pretty amazing by today's standards, because you just wouldn't see this kind of, say, animatronics, even like Hoggle's face is all like animatronics, or
Yep.
puppeteering. Even Ludo is like what somebody had to do is basically like a really strong, actor had to be in it, and it was like 200-pound suit,
Yep.
and they had to, kind of get in there, and they would just kill themselves for a few hours to control Ludo. So you wouldn't see that kind of stuff. It would probably be CG or something today.
It would. And unfortunately, though, I feel like that's the reason why if this movie were made today, it probably wouldn't hold up or nearly be as popular. Because I think the fact that they use so many practical effects in this movie, and really just had to, led to it, kind of being a little more timeless. I mean, yes, it is a very 80s film, but the effects aren't so distracting that you're not going to be like staring at the movie rather than watching it most of the time.
Yeah, that's one of the things. And I also really feel that because they were able to physically be there, especially with Jennifer Connelly being so young, you know how a lot of young actors have trouble acting with green screen or
Yep.
computer effects, is, if you have somebody who's voicing a talking doorknob and it's right there in front of you,
Yep.
like, that's a lot easier to grasp. And even one of the best examples, because by the way, if anybody wants to like look up a behind the scenes, this has like one of the best making ofs of like any movie ever. It's just like I think it's called Making the Labyrinth, so you can look it up. But there's like the tunnel of hands, where she falls down and all the hands are in the
Yep.
tunnel.
The helping hands.
Yeah, the helping hands, where all the people have to work together to get the hands to make faces.
Yep. That's
And
actually
it's-
really well done.
It is, yeah, and it's cool to watch them try and figure out, like all the actors trying to figure out how to do it together and working together. And so whenever they do it, it has a really like human, alive feeling to it, because, I mean, they were trying to actually do it. It wasn't in a computer, and they were just like, okay, do the voice and we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, let's sit and try and figure out how we're going to do this with some gloves.
Yep.
That kind of stuff has a super charm to it, because you can just tell that not only were these people, they probably worked with Jim Henson for quite a while, because they're very good puppeteers and they are very good at working with these suits and
Yes.
these little props. So if you're going to do it with somebody, I guess Jim Henson's the right person.
I definitely agree with that.
As far as the actual world, too, I just like how this movie never really stops to over-explain anything.
No, I definitely get what you're saying about that. As we go on to talk about some of the other films, under-explaining might be a problem, but
Yeah.
it's definitely not one in this one.
Yeah, I think it's so cool how I think this movie's only like an hour and a half long.
It's not very long at all, yeah.
Yeah, but it covers so much. And if you think about where they come from in the beginning, so they have like her house, right? And they show quite a bit of it. You could tell that there was quite a bit of money put into this movie.
Yeah.
When she first gets into the labyrinth, the entrance and actually running through the bricks, you have the tunnels, you have, you have so much. You have the garden maze, you have the helping hands, you have the actual goblin city. You just have so many things in this film. It's astounding that they were able to create that many sets with that many different puppets, because every single set piece in the movie has a different character.
Yep.
And that's what I just love, because whenever you think of an area, you think of those characters. Like when you're thinking of the garden, like the garden hedge maze,
Yep.
what you think of is the old man with the bird on his head.
Yeah.
And then eventually the cards, the cards who I was like, I don't lie, he lies. I don't lie, but he lies.
I will say that's one of my favorite sequences in the movie. I thought that was a really well written riddle, and I just enjoyed watching her like figure it out and like using deduction to like reason with these two guards, or like I guess technically they're more than two, but there's two physical like cards. There's four heads, but she's trying to reason with them and figure out which one's lying and which one's not, so that she can, find the right door and not fall to her certain death. But she figures it out fairly quickly and in a way that's, I think, really cool. And like, it's not just like these characters are just, oh, well, yeah, you go that way. Like she has to do the work.
Can't imagine that she would actually get through there in that amount of time that she had, by the way.
Oh, no, definitely implausible.
Yeah. I love that they put in the very beginning basically I don't know, I wouldn't say it's a cheap gag, but it's definitely like a what? Where the worm tells her to go the other way because it would have taken her directly to the castle, like right in the beginning.
Yeah.
Like it's so unnecessary to put that in there, but I think that they just put it in there to be like, to rule out a lot of the other things that you could do that would speed up the process. Like, oh, you can just climb on top of the walls and just run across,
Yep.
Or can you find some way to go over the top of it or go under, I think that they just put that in there to be like, yeah, we know that this is kind of a weird concept.
Yep. I thought it did a good job of demonstrating like how little attention she paid to anything. Like she didn't wait to hear his explanation for why she shouldn't go that way. Like they basically imply with his line that like, oh, why would you ever want to go to the castle? Like, and that's why he tells her not to go there. But she doesn't ever bother to figure out why he doesn't tell her to go that way. She's just like, oh, everybody here must want to help me because I'm the greatest thing that ever happened to Earth.
Yep. I think it's great. It's one of the main parts of Labyrinth is the music.
Yep.
And more so than the other movies that we're going to talk about. And the music, it's very 80s.
Oh, yes.
And I actually really like the soundtrack to Labyrinth. In fact, there's actually a Labyrinth soundtrack album.
Yep.
That has different versions of the songs that are in the movie. And I really like the way that the album sounds too, along with these songs.
Yeah.
Of course, the most famous one is Magic Dance.
Yep.
And yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. Like it's so over the top, cheesy movie song.
Yeah, it's
dance,
honestly
magic, jump, magic, and then everybody in the room jumps. And
I think part of what dates those songs so much is the arrangement of them. Like, yes, the lyrics are cheesy, but like David Bowie's vocals sound good on the songs. They're classic David Bowie vocals, but yeah, the arrangement of the songs is definitely very, very dated.
Yeah, and this was when a lot of people say David Bowie's musical career was kind of stagnating a little bit, and in terms of like inspiration and everything. This is the mid 80s, and yeah, he wasn't having quite as much of. I mean, he's very successful. He was extremely successful in the 80s, but he was definitely having some critics starting to lash out at him, saying that he was kind of like a shadow of what he used to be. But I mean, whenever you're doing a kids movie, a very playful movie, you write playful songs.
Yeah, I think his songs suit the film.
Absolutely. And When the World Falls Down, that song, of course, like I don't think I've ever had a girlfriend who didn't love that song. And of course, like there's the whole sequence where they're in like the ball, like the dreamy ball, and he's wearing like the nice cool outfit. I love that outfit. I want that outfit so bad. But yeah, it's great. I love the music in here, and all the instrumentals and everything for it, like the spacer music. I really like it because it has a huge like stringy, gutty bass sound, and it's very chorusy, and then also the synthesizers. I really like it. I think it fits it so well that I could not imagine if there was like a regular score in it.
Yeah.
Because this one is just, it is very mood intensive. Not only like does it enhance the mood, it basically sets the mood for this movie.
Definitely.
Basically, without it, it would be very like, okay, like
it'd be very dry.
Yeah, it would be a very, I don't know, it'd be a completely different film.
Yep.
So with the soundtrack to this film, with David Bowie songs and the instrumentals, I think it works really well. Do you know the one song I don't like in this movie, and the one sequence I've been waiting to talk about because I hate it?
What?
It's when she's in the forest and there's the little fire guys.
Oh yeah.
I cannot stand that part. I hate that song. And okay, we talk about how these effects hold up, right?
Yeah.
The green screen, or I think it was black screen in this film when they filmed it with.
Yeah.
It was so bad in like that forest scene that you're just like, what the heck happened with this movie?
That's what happens when you don't use practical effects, man.
Yeah, it's very true. You just tell they don't mix with the background at all in any way, and it just sticks out. She's like, oh, we're in the forest, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we're on obviously keyed out background, and the fire doesn't even make sense with where they are. I get that they were kind of limited on technology at the time, but
Yeah.
man, if I was them, I would have literally cut it out because it just sticks out so bad.
I'd agree with you on that. It's a pretty short film, so I understand why they didn't cut it out, but I feel like there's probably some other scene that they cut that they could have used instead.
Yeah, the thing about Labyrinth, and the one thing everybody has to realize, and I'll just kind of talk about the ending of this movie because it's very necessary if I'm going to talk about what I'm going to talk about next. So the ending of this film is kind of confusing because I'm going to analyze this as an adult. Okay, I know we're analyzing like a movie that's meant for children to maybe like preteens, but
Yep.
I'm going to analyze this as an adult. Okay, so in the beginning, when you see Sarah's room, you see basically everything that's going to happen. So
Yep.
you see the MC Escher sketch, right, the one with all the crazy stairways. You
Yep.
see Ludo, and I think
You see a few characters from the movie.
yeah, you see what's it? You see the little knight as he's like a little doll.
Yep.
Obviously, the dog is her dog. You
Yep.
see Jareth; he's a little figure.
She has the actual labyrinth is like this little maze that's sitting on her, her
Yep.
desk.
And then the scene where she's like at the ball. It's a little girl in a dress inside of like a little lantern. So when she breaks out the ball, she basically crashes through glass like would
Yep.
be inside that case. So it's heavily implying that it's kind of in her head, kind of like maybe like Alice in Wonderland or something like that, where she's kind of tripping a little bit.
Yeah, it's very much a like dream sequence implication.
Yeah, and at the end, when you're watching it, they very largely hint at that. She's looking in the mirror after she's gotten out of Labyrinth, and then she's got Toby back and everything, and she sees him in the mirror. She turns around, she's like, oh, like, I'm so glad, that we had this adventure, oh, I'm so happy and everything that we got to be friends. And they're like, you can always call on us whenever you need us. She's like, oh, well, I need you. So he's like, really? And she's like, yeah. And then she turns around and they're all in the room and it's real. And like they're inside of the real world. That's the one thing I've never understood about this movie is if you look at it from what they're implying throughout the whole film,
Yeah.
it's supposed to be that they're like, oh, kind of like, maybe you could even say that they're in their own magical world, right?
Yeah.
But they're not part of the real world. But at the end, they're just like, yeah, okay, we're real. Like, let's live together. Like, if there was like a sequel to it, they'd all just be in the real world with her.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that is probably the thing that dates this movie the most because I feel like that's a very 80s way to end a children's movie. Whereas I felt like it would have been a stronger ending if they had not included that.
You could tell that they obviously had like two endings ready, and they were just like, just go with whatever's the happiest one.
Oh, of course. They probably like tested it with 80s audiences, and parents were like, "Oh, I like the less Freudian dream sequence
Yep.
ending."
No, it's all real.
Yep.
But that is one of the things I want to talk about because I want to talk about the pacing and kind of the way the script is written. And I know we're going on like a really long time on Labyrinth, but this movie is like there's so much to talk about with it. So
There is.
whatever. I don't care if this episode's long. But the thing is that this script was rewritten a number of times and adjusted. I think they said it was like 12 to 20 times or something.
Yeah.
Where it was more playful in the beginning, then became more serious and was less sing-songy, and then David Bowie came on, and they kind of wanted to, he didn't really want it to be super dark, so they added like more songs and more stuff for him. In fact, before David Bowie even got onto the movie, they weren't even going to have the Goblin King really be in it as much. Like,
Yeah.
they weren't going to cut to him, because in the movie, Sarah will be going through Labyrinth, and they cut to David Bowie.
And he's like watching over her. And
Yeah.
He's like constantly, pissed off every time she like figures something out and gets closer to the castle.
Yeah, but that's the whole thing is they're like, well, we got David Bowie in this movie. Let's use David Bowie in the movie.
Yep.
And, I can't blame them. And I think that in a lot of ways, that this movie, for all its faults of like not really making as much sense if you actually think about it, they got it where it counts. And that is pacing, because just one thing happens right after another. You don't really stay in one section too long, no matter what the obstacle is.
And the movie also doesn't go by too fast for being, like an hour and 27 or 30 something, whatever minutes it is. It is very evenly paced. Like it's not a particularly long film, but it doesn't feel super short, nor does it feel very long.
Yeah, that was probably something where Jim Henson knew that this was going to be like a huge thing where we're just going to cut it exactly to where it works. Because when they did the Dark Crystal, I got to say, Dark Crystal, if we ever review it, it's a pretty clumsy film in execution sometimes.
Yeah.
Just with the way, like everything, it's hard to explain actually, but it's just doesn't work as well, doesn't flow as well. And with Jim Henson having so much trouble with Dark Crystal, I think with this one, he's just like, let's just cut it until it feels right. And yeah, some things aren't explained as well. Some things don't need to be explained as much, just because it's like takes you out of a realistic expectation.
Yeah.
And that's why I think this movie works. It's so weird because this movie does have quite a bit of errors, like some of the transitions for the puppets, like the dog especially, like the dog will walk off and it looks like, it's obviously a real dog, will walk off to the side and then come back here, and then the dog's obviously a puppet that doesn't look like a real dog at all.
Yeah.
Like there's some issues like that, and obviously some of the characterization like is a little clumsy. They're not super developed characters, but I mean, it just works, and it's like so weird, and I think that's why it became such a cult film, because in a theater, some people you're not really expecting this kind of film in a theater. It's not like super polished, even though it has a pretty okay budget.
Yeah, but it's definitely a movie that's taken off and has made a career of its own outside of the box office and has sold plenty.
Yeah, I mean, was there any question that we're going to recommend The Labyrinth? I mean, like...
Probably not. So, yeah, go watch it.
Go watch Labyrinth. As far as continued history for this, I do want to say that there is a few different things for this. There's a manga. There's like a manga sequel to it. I think this... Yeah, manga. I don't know how to say it.
It's manga.
Manga? Okay, so there's a manga sequel to this called Return to Labyrinth, and it takes on... I think it's like 13 years later, and it stars Toby. And it's this whole thing about him against the Goblin King. It's actually a lot better than you think it would be. If you've seen Labyrinth a million times, I really recommend actually reading the manga. Obviously, you have to go find out old copies of it, because it's pretty old at this point.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it was interesting. There's also a ton of different art books and things that have been published from the art in this movie.
Oh yeah. Even that candle company that we've talked about, you have a candle that's Saint Jareth. Like that's just another instance of like art from that film showing up in culture today.
Yeah, I love that. It's so good too. I want that one.
Yep.
And then one of the things is like this movie actually has a whole bunch of different games, which is kind of weird.
I didn't actually know that.
Yeah, so there's like a Famicom game.
Okay.
And then there's like a whole bunch of different other computer versions of it. And I think it was like also like on the Commodore 64 and Apple II, it's like a little adventure game.
Yeah.
So I just thought I'd mention that they're out there. And yeah, as far as products for Labyrinth, there's definitely a ton of different releases. If you want my recommendation for an actual physical release of it, like for the movie, I recommend the Blu-ray version because it has all the DVD bonus features.
Yep.
And it has this really weird bonus feature where during the movie, people who worked on it, they'll pop up and like talk about each scene as it's happening and the development of it. It's really, really weird. But if you've seen it like a million times, that's what I recommend, because the new Blu-ray gives it a little bit more life. So that's Labyrinth. Is like a very long discussion about Labyrinth, but it's a very easy film to talk about, and it's a very fun one to talk about.
Yep.
So go watch it. If you listen to the podcast, honestly, you've probably already seen this movie. So,
yep, watch it again.
Yeah. Okay, so it's gonna be our new segment for this episode, And as always, we've seeked out some really strange stories. And I'm pretty sure this is a legitimate story, but if it's not, don't criticize me, because I was just looking up Frankenstein stuff this week. Okay, so I found this story about a Korean adaptation. It's a musical of Frankenstein. So it's Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, but it's been adapted into a musical. And I guess it's made a ton of money, $8.2 million in a 10-week period.
Yeah.
And I guess it's just really, really popular, and basically set a record for its largest Korean-produced musical amount of money that they've ever made in one single season so far. It's crazy.
So that's pretty impressive.
It's pretty impressive. And I guess it's literally just an adaptation of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which is so strange. But apparently they say it's loosely based.
Okay. So it's the Universal Horror Story.
I guess it's very loosely based, I guess, to put it that way, because Victor dies and then he's reborn as the creature, I guess.
Okay, so they're taking some real liberties with this one.
So yeah, it's just making a ton of money, I guess. When it first premiered, so it's they're basically bringing it back to the stage. It had been released before, but it wasn't as successful the first time. It was very successful, but this is setting new records and everything.
Yeah.
So basically, when it was released in 2014, it got musical of the year. Frankenstein got musical of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really crazy. I guess it costs an insane amount of money to produce, and it's very, very extremely costumey and everything. And I actually managed to find a review of it. I guess somebody had seen it, and they were yeah, it's really bad. They were yeah, it's. I think, they probably went because it was Frankenstein. Because the only reason I could find that was in English was yeah, this is really bad.
Yep.
It's ridiculously. They said the songs themselves were the worst part, and that, of course, if it's a musical, that's all it is. So
yeah.
So yeah, that's what I thought was interesting. It's a South Korean musical adaptation of Frankenstein that's extremely successful.
So there you have it, folks.
Yeah.
Our other news segment this week. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the artist Ariello Voltaire. He pretty much releases kind of very tongue-in-cheek, kind of campy goth music, but he has also done a number of artistic endeavors like stop-motion animation and things of that nature.
Did some bumpers for MTV that are pretty cool too.
Yeah.
Is that a stop-motion?
But currently, he has a crowdfunding type deal going on. It's only going to last for a day longer, but it's basically to fund a YouTube series that he's going to do, which is goth homemaking, in which he basically kind of gives you the goth guide to having a goth house, whether that entails kitchen recipes or decor. I don't really know yet, but I'm very interested to see where it goes. I just thought it was worth mentioning, and I'm look forward to seeing what the show is actually like. Fortunately, when this episode comes out, the ability to fund him will already be over, so you guys won't be able to do that.
Look out for season 2.
Yep. But yeah, so it looks like there will be some interesting things to come out of that show.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Everything he does is always tinged with humor so much that it's really funny.
Yep.
But yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
I am as well.
So yeah, Voltaire's cool.
Yeah, so that's our Gothic news segment this week. It's a little bit shorter, but we had kind of a long episode, so had to balance it out.
Yeah, exactly.
That's Gothic news.
All right, so this is going to be our next movie. It's going to be The Hunger, and this is from 1983, and it's one of the most goth movies I've ever seen in my whole life.
Yeah, from the opening with Bauhaus playing.
Yeah, Bauhaus is actually in this movie. They play Bela Lugosi's dead, and
it's a concert. It's supposed to be a concert, and then David Bowie and his lover lure some couple and feed on them.
Yeah, so the basic plot, it's a little complicated, but I'll try I'll try and get it started. So there's Miriam Blaylock. She's a vampire, and she has a lover who's John Blaylock, and that's David Bowie.
Yes.
And
he started to age.
Yeah, he's starting to age. So they've been a couple, she turned him into a vampire, and they've been a couple for, I think, 200 years or something.
Yeah, I think it's about that amount of time.
Yeah, so it's been quite a while. But now he's starting to age, And the movie starts out with them going to a club and then preying on people, like in a club scene, because it's obviously very simple in that kind of situation. And then they like burn the remains in her house.
Yeah, and there's also like a shower sequence with them where,
Yeah.
like, you know, they're like, they keep saying forever and ever. Like, it's supposed to be this implication that they're going to have this undying love where they will remain immortal and never be without each other.
Yeah. So they also teach this little girl named Alice. So they're basically like music teachers. I think it's mostly just like to keep up like with like an image, you know?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, part of the thing is it's not very well explained in the movie, but there's like a brief like throwaway line that kind of explains why she's in the movie. But Miriam is basically prepping this young student to be her next lover when John dies. Yeah.
Oh man, I didn't catch that at all.
Yeah. Basically John calls her out on it and she just like ignores the comment, and that's why he kills the kid.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, but so all of a sudden David Bowie's character starts aging, like very, very rapidly. And he notices wrinkles, he notices that he's more tired, and so he goes to see this doctor, Dr. Sarah Roberts, because
she's working on the potential to reverse the aging process, because she's been studying genetic diseases which speed up the aging process, and she believes that's the key to reversing it.
I don't know, she basically blows him off flat out. She says, oh, okay. She thinks he's basically crazy. He's like, oh, I need to see you immediately.
Yeah, she thinks he's either like OCD or like psychotic or something, and she sends him to the waiting room, and she even like calls one of the other doctors and is like, oh, you know, another loony came in, he's harmless, so just leave him alone, he'll go away on his own.
Yeah. And then in that time when he's waiting, he basically ages to like a super old man.
Yeah, he goes from being like 50 to like 80, which I thought was funny that like no one in the lobby noticed as he's like sitting there.
Yeah, I know, right? But as he goes away, he basically goes back home. He kills the little girl, and basically his lover tells him that like, oh, this happens, and you know, there's nothing you can do, and you'll never die. And so what she does is lock him up in a box, like a coffin.
While he's still alive and completely incapacitated, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's basically like a vegetable.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of other coffins. And so basically she has like this collection of lovers that she just keeps for eternity.
Yep, up in the attic. It's literally a room full of like 200-plus-year-old lovers. It's so weird. It's very strange.
And as she like seals the coffin, she like talks to her last lover and is like, this is John. Please be kind to him. It's his first night here.
Yeah. After that, what happens is this doctor who basically blew him off seeks him out and actually meets Miriam. So the crazy vampire lady who just locked him in a box.
Yeah. In the sequence of about 10 minutes, they go from like inquisition about John to having a sex scene.
It's pretty fast. So so Sarah, the doctor, has been dating a guy named Tom, and it's shown that they already have some conflict, so they're just like they're not very passionate, you know?
Yeah.
And then Miriam kind of seduces Sarah, and
it kind of reminds me of almost like an old Dracula kind of seduction where like
Yeah.
it's like, oh, you just fall under my graces and do whatever I want you to do.
Pretty much. It's honestly very true. So then they get it on and they start this relationship. They're basically like just wants to be with Miriam. And she notices that she starts feeling really funny. So she doesn't like being in the sun.
She doesn't want to eat.
Yeah, and like it repulses her, and she just smokes cigarettes and feels very ill.
She only feels sexual towards Miriam.
She basically figures out like, oh, you know, like I don't even think they say the word vampire really in this movie, but
they never use the word vampire. But what happened?
Really?
No, they never actually use the word vampire, because I thought that was one thing that was interesting about this movie, was because they basically kind of took this plot where like vampirism is essentially like a genetic disorder, and that's how it ties into like her working at the lab as a genetics doctor, and the lab's the one who figures out that she has this DNA that's fighting with her DNA. And I'll get to the better explanation of what's going on when we get to what happens later on in the film, because it's very specific what happens and why it happens, and it's not clearly explained in the movie, and I actually had to look it up.
I think I know what you're talking about. So she basically gets this vampirus. Get it?
Yep.
Vampire virus. Vampirus. Yeah, see. I was waiting to use that. And Miriam basically lures Tom to the house, like when Sarah's basically reeling, like basically withdrawing and like needs blood.
Yep.
And so basically forcing her, like, because she just can't not kill him, like, to get the blood.
So
she forces her to kill her own lover,
Yep.
like the man that she loved before. And then why don't you explain what happens after that?
So prior to that happening, there is a scene where her husband and her partner at the genetics lab have like tested her blood, and they figured out that, like, you know, there's foreign DNA running through her veins. It's fighting to take over hers. It's like this host-parasite relationship that they don't explain very well. And then she goes back to Miriam, very upset, and wants her to explain what she's done to her. And she basically just tells her, like, oh, trust me. And then she's like, oh, you're full of crap. And then she's like, well, you're going to have, you know, eternal life. And then for some reason, she kind of decides to go along with it. I think she just can't keep from consuming. So she ends up feeding, and then she, you know, assumes that she's doomed to that fate. But after she kills Tom, that's like a turning point for the film. And basically there is a scene in which she's trying to like get a hold of like the genetics doctors again, and like no one can like help her. And she basically pieces together from what was mentioned earlier in the film about it being like a host-parasite relationship, that the reason that Miriam stays young and that the others age is because her virus feeds off of their virus, killing them somehow.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like that. Basically, the head vampire will infect a person with the virus, right?
Yep.
And then that virus mutates with the other, with the person who's newly infected.
Yep.
But then if that person reinfects the main person,
yep,
then it kills them.
Yeah, because it somehow like reverses the host situation. And it's a very like pseudo sciencey explanation of why vampires exist and why they don't age. But basically, her and Miriam are kissing, and Miriam has like an Ankh necklace that she wears around her neck. For those of you who don't know, it's the Egyptian symbol for eternal life.
If you listen to a Goth podcast, you probably know what
you probably
Ankh is.
know, but for those of you who don't, I'm sure everyone's seen one. I'm just not sure that everybody knows what the word is. She takes it because that's what they use to physically cut people to draw blood, and she stabs herself with it and forces Miriam to drink the blood, and that messes up the biology of, you know, the virus. And then Miriam ages, and all of her lovers who are kept alive die, and it's assumed that they have peace after that.
Yeah.
And then the movie doesn't really do a good job of explaining how Sarah survives the whole stabbing herself with the necklace, because it looks like she loses a lot of blood. But I guess somehow she survives because the movie ends with her like overlooking like this beautiful scenery with these two people, and I'm not really sure what that's supposed to imply.
It's implied that they wanted a sequel.
No, that's actually there's two endings for this movie, and one of them implies that they want a sequel, and the original one is just bizarre.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the point is this movie is very boring to explain.
Yes. However, in terms of what this movie does very well, I will say cinematography and framing is very good in this movie. Color correction is very beautiful, very Blade Runner-esque. You can explain why that is, Donnie.
All right, so Tony Scott, the director of this film, is Ridley Scott's brother. And Ridley Scott directed, obviously, like Alien. He directed Blade Runner, and this is before, obviously, The Hunger was made.
Yep.
And Tony Scott, this being his first film, I think he took a lot from his brother in that it's a very smoky-looking kind of movie in some scenes. It's very dark. It's very, dimly lit. It has a very specific kind of framing for it.
Yep.
And a lot of course, metaphorical shots introduced in there, like with the Egyptian stuff and everything.
Yeah.
And so I think that a lot of that influence from his brother probably rubbed off for this film because honestly, Tony Scott went on to do a lot of other different movies, and most of them don't resemble The Hunger very well.
No, not
Like,
at all. And
he did Top Gun, for God's sakes.
yeah, he did Top Gun. He did one of my favorite movies, True Romance, which is very different from either of these movies.
Yeah. Danger Zone. As far as music and everything, like I seriously think what the thing this movie is best at is the aesthetic. Like,
Oh, I completely agree.
it's very cool.
It's a beautiful movie to watch. And I will say, like, David Bowie's acting isn't bad in this movie. His acting is decent, but the script is very poor, and so there's not a lot for him to work with. Like, he doesn't have a lot to say, and his lines are very generic, but he says them well. And I don't think anyone is that bad of an actor in this movie, except for maybe Sarah's husband. Maybe some of like the lab sequences are a bit boring, but everything is very beautiful. Everything is basically just a wonder to look at and to listen to. You have a soundtrack that's very, very, kind of like dark, wavy, like lots of kind of like sequence synthesizers against like drum machines and like these kind of ethereal sounds. Like the opening with Bela Lugosi's dead. It all really adds to the aesthetic of this film. And so while this movie is not a perfect plot or a perfect script by any means, I do honestly enjoy watching this movie from time to time, and I think it's a great movie to put on for parties, and it's I think the perfect film to have on when you're like having a party. Something can just kind of be in the background. People don't have to pay attention to what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great to look at.
Exactly. I mean, I don't think I can say it any better than that. I think that this film has a lot of problems, unfortunately.
Yeah.
While it is pretty cool in terms of like what the basis of it is, like the beginning seems like it will be.
Yep.
The movie goes in a completely different direction.
Yeah. So
it becomes more about like a scientific. I don't know. It's really weird. I don't know. It seems like it's fighting with wanting to be a kind of science-y explanation for vampires and this whole thing about like betrayal and everything.
Yeah,
but
there's too many plot devices, I think, that are fighting with each other. And so one is the science explanation of vampires, and another is the love triangle that is, John, Sarah, and Miriam. But John also, as much of a character as he is in the movie, he's in there for 40 minutes, but as soon as he dies, like, he has no role in the film anymore, and there was almost no point of having him be involved.
Other than to show that Miriam is like brutal.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much it.
And he doesn't have that many lines, so I'm almost confused as to why his character is there. They could have easily not had him in the movie and explained all the things just as well, and perhaps had less plot confusion go on.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of weird. I just think that Miriam is just so one note. Like, basically, the moment she's like awful, that's it. That's her character.
Yep.
And then everything else in this movie is cool, but yeah, the pacing is like, it's so slow. Like, it's not a super long movie, but it feels insanely long.
Actually, I didn't mind the pacing of this movie that much. I just felt like it was a very hard movie to follow because you kept jumping around from all these different explanations of what was going on, and nothing really felt very linear. I don't know. I got distracted a lot watching the movie and had to keep like rewinding it to make sure I was getting things right when I was taking my notes.
Yeah, I'd probably definitely watch it twice to understand it all.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's okay. It definitely wins a lot in terms of like cool factor, and that it's like a movie that seems very, very rooted in like vampires and actual like 80s goth aesthetics. But outside of that, it's just like it's not like the best movie.
No, what I will say this film does really well is an attempt at perhaps a new kind of vampire film. Do I think it's successful? Maybe not. However, I do think it was a good try. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more, and I really wish that this movie was there was more to say about it. Unfortunately, I think I have to recommend it mostly for its aesthetics, but I think this could have been a really good film.
I agree. I mean, it's like I said, just has some good elements, has some not so good elements. Just if you go into it thinking that, like, you don't think it's gonna be like, oh my gosh, it's a vampire film with David Bowie, it's probably gonna be the best movie ever.
Yeah.
Then you'll probably be okay. But like, I think a lot of people go into it thinking like, oh my gosh, a vampire film with David Bowie that has like gothic influences, like, oh man, it's gonna be amazing, and you're like, what? You know?
Yep.
So it's a flawed film in some ways, but it's not awful.
No, not by any means. And like I said, I still enjoy watching it today. Like,
Yeah.
even though it, it's a little out there and the plot doesn't entirely make sense, it's fun to watch sometimes.
Yeah. So that's The Hunger.
I recommend that people watch it. Just don't expect a masterpiece.
That's what I'll say. I don't recommend it as highly as you do. I think it's a cool movie, but like, I don't want to rewatch it that much. In fact, I rewatched it for this podcast. Yeah, I still think it's a very beautiful film, but I just don't find myself attached to these people very much. And yeah, that's it for me.
All right, that's The Hunger.
Okay, so now we're on to our last movie of this podcast, and it's going to be David Bowie's actually first like starring role in a main film, and it's 1976's The Man Who Fell to Earth.
Yeah, so this is a science fiction drama film, which was directed by Nicholas Roeg. Am I saying that right?
I think so.
Okay. And it's based on the Walter Tevis's 1963 novel of the same name, and it's basically about a man, well, not a man, an alien who looks like a man, who crash lands on Earth and is trying to find a way to save his planet from a horrible drought. Is the brief synopsis of what happens.
Yeah, he's basically trying to figure out how to get water to his planet.
Although that's a horrible description of what this movie is about.
It becomes so not about that by the end that it's whenever you say it, like, okay, that's what he's doing in the beginning of the movie, but then that's not what really happens. So yeah, this alien played by David Bowie, and this is David Bowie when he's on an insane amount of cocaine. This is the mid-70s. Okay,
that would continue until probably the 90s.
Well, I mean, he cleaned up in the 80s.
Sort of.
But yeah, so David Bowie's like insanely gaunt, and he's super thin, and he's really, really drugged out, and you can just tell in this film. Like,
I mean, he looks damn good for being drugged out.
Yeah, but yeah, he plays an alien named Newton, and he's trying to get water back to his home planet. He's been there for they imply that he's been there a lot of years by this point, and he basically can make a fortune. He makes a fortune off all these patents that he has, and for like new technology, or I think it's technology that already existed or something like that he created.
Yeah, it's stuff that he basically took from his home planet that's basically considered like everyday boring stuff that Earth has yet to discover, and so he just brings these designs to Earth, and he's going to sell, patent out these designs so he can make billions and billions of dollars, so he can have enough money to transport water back to his home planet and save them from a drought.
That's exactly it. And so he does part of that. So he basically patents all stuff and makes millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, and becomes like one of the biggest companies on the planet, for technology.
Yeah, and, it's called World Enterprises Corporation.
Yeah. And so he becomes like this mysterious, withdrawn entrepreneur. It goes on for a few years, by the way. Like this takes him a while. So he's been off his planet for years at this point. And but he meets this girl named Mary Lou.
Yep.
She works at like a hotel. She's basically like a maid at a hotel.
She almost kills him.
Yeah, almost killed him. Yeah, by accident, like in the elevator.
Because apparently he like can't deal with like the gravity change of moving the Earth.
Something like that. Like he doesn't like fast cars. He doesn't like stuff that moves.
Any kind of like movement like really screws with his equilibrium.
Yeah. And so he almost instantly hits it off with this Mary Lou. I mean, as much as he can. And then they get basically like married. I mean, they're not married, but they
live together.
They live together like almost instantly. And
he builds a house that's like right next to where he landed conveniently, so he can fly back home or whatever, supposedly.
Yeah, so obviously he's getting like sidetracked from his thing.
Yeah.
He starts living this life with this new woman, and she knows he has like a wife. He says that he has a wife.
Yep. Well, and they cut back and forth in the film between his wife back home and like
His
him
kids.
being and then him being on Earth. And eventually you see them die, so like you know that there isn't a point to him going back really.
Yeah, because he's there for so long, and he basically gets distracted by like he becomes like an alcoholic. So this alien becomes an alcoholic.
It's kind of funny. Well, not funny, but it's interesting. You know how you brought up that this movie was made in such a dark place in his life, and it kind of almost in a way mirrors like what basically happened to David Bowie because of his career.
You know, in some of this, because later in the movie, so he basically is discovered like one of this Dr. Bryce, this guy, he uses like an X-ray camera that David Bowie's character had invented to take a picture of him.
Yep.
And so they find out that he basically has like no functioning, like no organs. He's not like a human. Basically, he has like no bones or anything.
Yep.
And basically, when he does that, even though he's like the most powerful man on the planet, the government starts testing on him. They basically capture him, keep him inside this like luxury apartment where he's constantly fed alcohol. You know, he's basically given alcohol all the time, so he doesn't
sedate him basically by just giving him fun drugs.
Yeah, and he basically doesn't say no because he likes the feeling. And he gets experimented on, like all these really crazy experiments, and it's actually kind of hard to watch sometimes.
Yeah. Well, it should also be mentioned, though, that his appetite for alcohol has already started before they start, like, feeding him it as a sedative.
Oh, yeah.
And so, like, he already kind of has an alcohol addiction, and they basically just keep him sedated by fueling his alcohol addiction.
Yep. Yeah, so hopefully you're keeping up with this plot, by the way. So they basically do all these experiments, and like I guess like years and years and years go by. And keep in mind, David Bowie's like Newton, the alien, never ages.
Yep.
And everyone else around him ages. So in the time that he's still being experimented on, they bring back because basically his wife had left him, the maid.
Yeah,
Mary Lou. She had left him because of his alcohol addiction.
And she comes back and she looks like she's been screwed over by alcohol.
Yeah, like looks 20 years older.
They have very, very dark sex.
I love that scene, by the way. Like, yeah, I guess I'll just take this moment to talk about how much nudity there is in this movie.
Yeah.
There's a lot of nudity in this movie. And
that's one of the things that's most commented on when people review this film is whether or not to call this film just pornography. I think that it has more merit than to just call it that.
I think it does, yeah. I think... I will say this, though. The nudity isn't super tasteful at times.
No, it's not.
In fact, there's literally like a part in the movie where... So Dr. Bryce, before he's like working for David Bowie's company and like exposes him, he's basically like a college professor, and he's like banging all the students.
He's
and
screwing the students and like...
Yeah.
You want to explain the sex scene?
Yeah, there's literally a part where a woman grabs his penis, and it's like full male nudity, right?
Yep.
Grabs his penis and says like, "Oh, you're not like my dad at all."
Yeah.
Like,
she also like puts her panties around the picture of his like wife and kids.
Yeah, and it's not super tasteful. I would say that like, okay, if they had minimized that to some extent until the part with Mary Lou at the, near the end.
Yeah.
Like the crazier part, that would have made more sense to me. But the fact that they throw in like a lot of nudity, a lot of boobs, like all that stuff, it does detract from it in a way, because like if they just cut it out and then kept in the part that was more about like character driving, maybe the point, maybe just the part with David Bowie and is Mary Lou, like both of those scenes,
Yep.
It would have made more sense. But the fact that they just seems like they just added in, because they could have characterized Dr. Bryce without actually showing full nudity.
Yeah.
I don't care. Like, I really don't care about nudity in a movie, but like for what this film is going for, I don't think it helps its case.
No, and I will say I think there's a difference between showing nudity in a film for the sake of like portraying a theme or like an idea, and just throwing it in there just to make people like feel like it's provocative or something. And I kind of feel like this movie does the latter more.
Yeah. I would definitely agree with that. Outside of that, right? So now that we're done with the nudity part, yeah. So after he's been captured, he gets experimented on, whatever. Newton lives so long, like so much longer than everybody else, that actually he basically outlives the experiments. Like he's there so long that everyone has left the facility.
Yep.
like either they're dead or whatever. But
Yeah, he just basically realizes that there's no one left there, and he's like, "Oh, I can leave."
yeah, he just walks out. So
By the way, very confusing.
yeah, that was just weird. Yeah, all of a sudden the experiments just stop. I mean, it's crazy. And there's not really an explanation for that in the movie other than that he basically outlived the experiments.
Yeah.
Like the people who were doing them. So at the very end of the movie, he makes an album of music that's supposed to that he wants to send to his planet. And keep in mind, his family's dead. His family's been dead. And Dr. Bryce has married his ex-wife, basically. And at the end of the movie, David Bowie, I mean, the alien Newton, sorry, it's hard not to say David Bowie. But Newton the alien is still an alcoholic. And Dr. Bryce is just like, oh, well, I liked your album, and okay. And then they're like, oh, we should cut you off, Newton, from drinking alcohol. It's like, yeah, I think so. And then the movie just ends.
Yeah, it's a weird ending. By the way, if you actually read why, like, he makes the album, it's supposed to be like this, like, it's actually supposed to be like a message, like, back to his home planet. And there's like brief allusions to that earlier in the film, like the way he perceives music. They'll briefly portray it as being distorted, and then they'll show like what it actually sounds like. I think the hint is that like where he comes from, music is like this form of language, and so it's a very David Bowie-esque kind of idea about like the meaning of music.
But it's that's the plot. I mean, basically, it's an alien that comes to Earth, becomes alcoholic, and lets his family die.
Yeah,
I mean, that's pretty much it. And then doesn't age.
Yeah, well, basically, I don't know, if you want to review it from a critical standpoint, like, you can see it as like a critique of what wealth and fame do to you. You have this.
He was about an alien, obviously. Didn't you hear them say it? No, I know. Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah, I think very much is that, actually.
Yeah, because you have this humanoid creature who basically has never experienced Earth's pleasures before and is very easily captivated by them and drawn into them and sucked into them, to the point where like he has to have like a bunch of TVs on at the same time just to like stimulate his brain enough. It's very much like a critique of like consumerism in America and drug addiction in America, and the way everything revolves around money and success and pleasure. I will say it has that going for it in terms of a social critique, but I just have to come out and say it. I cannot stand the pacing of this movie.
It's a very slow movie. It's like 2.5 hours long.
Yeah.
So it's already a really long movie, especially for the 70s. And it's done in a very 70s style way.
And it feels like it's 4 hours.
Yeah. I would say the biggest issue with this movie, because it actually has some pretty good music and stuff in here. And it actually has some, I'll say it has some very 70s cinematography, like a lot of like hard zooms in on stuff. And a lot of like film dissolves into like weird psychedelia flashbacks.
Those were things that I didn't appreciate as much, but
yeah. So it has a lot of those kind of things, but I would say the biggest issue with this movie over everything is the editing. I'd say the editing is all over the place, because a lot of the times whenever like a lot of time has been passed, like, you're watching the movie and you're like, oh, like, okay, I guess he's trying to get the patents, right? And it kind of cuts, and like all of a sudden you realize like, oh, I guess he sold the patents and he's like a millionaire. And it's just hard to tell like how much time is passing in this movie.
It is.
And it's very disorienting. In fact, even like the flashbacks to when like to his family and stuff, it happens so sporadically. I almost think if you could like edit those parts in a little better, or at least make it clear like what's happening in the first place. Yeah. Then like it's just like the editing I think is what disjoints all this movie.
I think it should also really be pointed out that they aren't flashbacks, like they're concurrently happening with what's going on Earth.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I just think that like the way everything's edited just like completely kills the flow of this movie.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And one other thing that really drives me nuts about this movie is that although there's some, decent lines, some decent script in this movie, I don't feel like a lot of it's delivered very well. I feel like David Bowie's the best actor in this film. I don't find Bryce's character to be like, I don't care about him and I don't care about Newton's lawyer at all. He's a very dry character, doesn't really say a whole lot. Everybody's performance just feels a little dry.
That's definitely an issue here. It's because David Bowie is so interesting in this movie, and yeah, he's all over the place.
Yeah.
He doesn't really seem to know exactly what the character is supposed to be like. But everyone else just feels like an average 70s actor. No one really stands out. I would say the best actor in this other than him is Mary Lou. Like his...
I would agree, yeah. Mary Lou is probably the most developed character.
Yeah, probably the best acting, too. Like, I mean, It's just delivers it like horror and lust and neediness very well. Whereas everybody else, I just kind of like just falls by the wayside.
Yeah, everybody else kind of feels very tropey except for the two of them.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a super 70s movie. What it's trying to say, like how it's shot, like the music, the just everything about it.
Yeah.
It's a really cool movie. Like I was not liking this movie until it got pretty far into it.
I think that's the biggest problem with it is, okay, I admit it gets better probably about halfway through the film.
Mm-hmm.
But at that point, I was like mostly like not interested in watching the movie. Like I kept watching because it got better and I wanted to see how it ended. But halfway through the movie, like it's a long time for the movie to really take off.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I've seen this movie like 2 or 3 times. It's been a long time since I had seen it before I rewatched it for the podcast. I almost want to go back and see it one more time, like after I've just recently watched it, to see if I get a little bit more out of it. But yeah, like the second half of this movie is so much better than the first because I don't know, you spend so much time with dealing with like rich guy life.
Yeah.
Before it gets to like any kind of climax.
Well, and plus the rich guy life, all it really does is set up the story arc that happens in the second act of the film. So why couldn't they have just explained that with like 30 minutes of, editing instead of like an hour of film?
Yeah, I think that they were obviously trying to do characterization. I get it. Like they were trying to put in as many different elements of human life that he can't relate to into this movie. So
I get it. I just feel like it could have been explained quicker. Like,
oh yeah, I absolutely think so. But they tried to touch on the fact that he's like introduced to alcohol, then he's introduced to sex, then he's introduced to love, then he's introduced to like obviously basic companionship. He's introduced to money. Like they do it all like slowly, and so that you can see that nothing that you desire as people is taken in the same way or is processed the same way.
Yeah.
But I mean, do we need to see all that? I mean, I honestly think that if we can show companionship and obviously alcohol, which he becomes addicted to, I think that we're gonna get that he's probably addicted to this. Probably doesn't understand the concept of sex if he doesn't understand any physical, stuff, and obviously can show the fact that he's addicted to TV in 1 or 2 shots instead of like having multiple sequences where he's sitting there watching TV, drinking alcohol, and let it slowly happen.
Yeah. I will say part of the problem is probably the time frame that this movie was made in. Like 70s movies, they take a lot more time to explain things than movies would now.
Even in the 80s, I mean, like that was when it was kind of getting streamlined.
Yeah, the 80s I feel like is where it really starts to, like, there is a lot of it in the 80s, but I feel like that's where modern filmmaking really started to happen, was in the 80s. And so there really is a big disconnect for 70s films and modern films today, whereas like 80s films the pacing might be a little different and people might notice differences between them and modern films. I think people will relate to them much more because I feel like that was the start of kind of like modern cinema.
Yeah, I would agree with that, especially like with movies like Alien and stuff coming out in 79 and kind of like being that bridge to the next era. But I think I like this movie more than you did. In fact, I was not a big fan of this movie coming to preparing for this episode for this podcast because like I said, I've seen this movie multiple times before this, and it just never really clicked with me that much. But I literally sat down and was like, I'm going to watch this movie and have no other distractions. And by the end of it, I was like, yeah, this is actually pretty cool. Like I really ended up liking the way it develops.
Yeah.
But man, like it just has a slow front end on this movie, and that's like its biggest issue.
It has good social critique, a good story, a decent script. I just think it could be paced better. I think it could be edited better. And unless you're watching the Blu-ray version, it's not terribly exciting to look at.
Yeah, it's like a movie from the 70s.
Yeah.
I do like some of the sets. I do like some of the things that they did with that. Some of the, his makeups. Like, the David Bowie just looks like David Bowie, so
Yep.
it's not really makeup on him that much. But they do have, like, the alien makeup, which is, like, very generic. But, like, the actual home planet makeup is pretty cool, like, with the water suits.
Yeah.
But this movie, it's a little strange. I ended up actually liking it a lot more than I thought I would, after seeing it a few times. Like, it just kind of grew on me in a weird way.
See, that's how I felt about The Hunger. I went into The Hunger really not wanting to watch it again.
Uh-huh.
And actually enjoying it more. I think we had reverse experiences.
Yeah, I know. I think I've seen The Hunger too many times is probably what the issue is with that movie.
Yeah.
I think I'm a little burnt out on The Hunger, actually. I've seen that a lot of times. But that's The Man Who Fell to Earth. It's a very unique movie. If you're a David Bowie nut, like, I would obviously recommend it.
Even if you're not a David Bowie nut, I think it's a really interesting exploration of and critique of human life and addiction of kind of like Western society. So if you're like a film buff, I would recommend it as well. But if you're not a David Bowie nut and you're not a film buff, I'm not sure that there's a lot there to draw you in.
Approach with caution. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're used to watching like horror films or alien movies from even the 80s upwards, this is a very different movie than what you would be used to in terms of like how slow it is, like the music, the dialogue, everything just, it's all over the place. So, I recommend it if you're kind of into odd David Bowie films from the 1970s about aliens.
So technically, most of David Bowie's films kind of fit that category.
Kind of. As far as like continued history about this movie, there's not like a ton, but the thing that most people know is that one, the cover from Station to Station is still from this movie.
Yeah.
And some of the music apparently was the stuff he was kind of working on for this film because he was trying to make a soundtrack for it, but it never came out.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened more than Station to Station was Low. So Low took huge influence from all the demos and everything that he had made for this movie, and also, of course, the cover of Low is just David Bowie and The Man Who Fell to Earth.
Yeah.
And so, that's probably why Low has a very alien-like feel to it as an album, but that's probably what most people would recognize from this film who aren't super familiar with it.
Yeah.
So, that's The Man Who Fell to Earth. All right, so we hope you have enjoyed this rambling on about how amazing David Bowie is and how weird some of the movies he's been in. Yeah, some weird stuff in there. Very unique career. Obviously, just like his music career, he definitely didn't just choose things that are all very similar.
Yeah, and I will say one of the things that I really enjoy about David Bowie is that it's kind of become a staple that, like musicians will also be actors or actors will also be musicians. But I really feel like David Bowie's ventures into other arts were genuine ventures into other arts, or like he really tried to act instead of like it. It wasn't just a scheme to make more money because Lord knows David Bowie made plenty of money in his lifetime.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I would say that he's definitely more successful than some people in terms of. I think he also because he just chose very specific projects. That, like, you aren't just like, oh, this was a movie that he was in. Like, he chose projects that one he would have like a lot to do in,
or like if he was playing a smaller role, he chose movies that he felt like he fit the role for, or like he would only accept roles that he felt like he was suited for.
Yeah,
like I don't know if we'll ever talk about The Prestige, probably not, but he's in The Prestige, and I think he does an excellent job playing that character.
Yeah, so this has been GothCast episode 21.
Yep. And so, as always, we got to do our plugs.
Yes, so we're part of The Belfry.
Yep.
It's www.thebelfry.rip, and that is a network of goth podcasts. They also link to external blogs, YouTube shows, and they have a bunch of artists listed on there, and it's basically anything that's relating to the goth subculture. And if you're a fan of it, if you're just getting into it, or you're a veteran, you've seen everything, they'll definitely have something for you on the Belfry.
Definitely. And it's just honestly a good network. I think we've really enjoyed working with them.
Yeah.
They're very, it's a great network. Good people are on it. Lots of good communication. Couldn't be happier to be a part of it. And then, of course, we always got to plug our social media. So we have Instagram, just GothCast, Facebook, GothCast. Website is gothcastradio.com. No www, because why do that? And our YouTube channel is GothCast space video. And we also have an email, which is gothcastradio@gmail.com. And you can reach us at any of those mediums. And we are happy to respond to any comments or questions or requests. So feel free to reach out.
Okay, and stay spooky.